Going back to 1979, that's Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark with Electricity, their first single. It also appeared on their debut album that same year. The band formed in 1978, and if I just read off the track listing of their best of here, songs like Messages and Enola Gay, Souvenir, Joan of Arc, Maid of Orleans, Tesla Girls, I could go on and on. Of course, OMD had a major impact on music in the 1980s, and now have reformed, and they're doing a bunch of shows and possibly coming to the U.S. We've got Andy McCluskey, lead singer of OMD, on the phone with us now. Welcome to the show, Andy, and let's start off talking about influences. And what were you listening to when you were growing up?
I think the formative influences were German electronic music from the 70s, most noticeably Kraftwerk.
Sure.
But also kind of had soft spots for David Bowie, Velvet Underground, and Roxy Music, and Brian Eno. They would be, literally, I think, five fingers in my hand, they would be the five main influences.
You know, that early 70s glam period seems to have influenced an entire generation of musicians who made a name for themselves in the late 70s and the early 80s. Was it the style or the idea that they were doing something different or unique?
I don't know if I'd say that glam as such had a conscious influence on us, but I think that when we were in our early teens, that music was all over the charts, and perhaps unconsciously, when we were actually trying to experiment, we were unconsciously doing it in a way that was actually distilling sort of the Kraftwerk thing down into 3-minute pop versions of electronic experiments. So maybe there was a sort of unconscious influence there.
What was the decision to, when you obviously get the keyboards and you decided this is the way we're going to go? Was it the temper of the times? That's what was happening musically, or were you just legitimately interested in doing something with those machines?
I think we were specifically trying to do something different, which, if I look back, seemed quite logical. The music went through changes regularly, and I think every generation, to a large degree, was specifically trying to rebel against the immediately previous sound style. So we really didn't want to sound like rock or what we considered to be pop. We were consciously adopting electronics and keyboards because we wanted to sound different. And we thought, though, that we were being terribly experimental. I can remember being deeply offended, actually, when Tony Wilson from Factory Records was the first person who said to us, "Oh, this is the future of pop music." And we were like, "No, it's not. It's experimental. How dare you call us pop?" So, I think that really, it as a conscious decision, it was an attempt to find something that, sounded different to what was in the charts at the time, which, of course, in the mid-70s, it was, but strangely enough, a few years later, it turns out that, completely by chance, we'd got onto a wave that was about to break with electronic music in the late 70s and early 80s.
And those songs that, you considered experimental wound up becoming actual pop songs and in the charts.
Oh, I mean, nobody was more surprised than us. We believe me, we never would have invented a band with a stupid name like Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, playing synthesizers using a tape recorder and playing in punk clubs if it had been a conscious attempt to sell millions of records. We, in this day and age of American Idol and everything sort of, everybody wants to be famous but doesn't care how they are, we were just trying to do experimental music and totally accidentally got successful.
At the time, obviously, there were other acts like Yaz and Depeche Mode who were kind of on that same, you're all on that same path in a way. And did the UK press ever try, because I know they're very gossipy and very tabloid-oriented over in Britain, did they ever try to stir up any kind of rivalry or anything like that?
No, I mean, I think the UK tabloids have got worse over the last 30 years. When we all first started out, in fact, they weren't particularly interested in us because they didn't get it. I think that the strange thing for all of us was that bands like ourselves and like Depeche Mode and Human League and Cabaret Voltaire and other electric bands, we were all surprised when we found that there was other people who'd obviously been listening to the same German records from the import section of the record stores that they'd been going to, because we were all in different provincial cities, and so I think, you know, that we all thought we were working in our own little vacuum, and we were all a bit surprised when we discovered, oh, there's somebody else doing that, there's somebody else doing that, and it was a bit weird, but I don't think there was a huge sort of animosity or rivalry at all.
Well, you wound up having some pretty big U.S. success. I think the first single that did well over here was "So in Love." I think might have been the first song.
It took us a while to really get established in America. I mean, it was quite strange for some years because we were selling millions of records in Europe and playing large concerts. And then we come to America and we'd be in tiny little clubs crawling on stage at 1 o'clock at night, and we'd been signed to a record company. I mean, essentially, we were on Virgin in England, and they'd kind of done a package deal where they'd given us and several other bands to a label in America who patently didn't really have any interest in us. And I can remember, you know, that seemed their attitude of releasing a record was to hide it under the carpet and see if anybody found it, you know. So there was no great big marketing push in the early days. So it took until we changed to A&M Records in 1984 before we got a record company that really wanted to get behind us. And then, yes, things did start to take off. Obviously, we had So in Love, and then the big door opener was If You Leave from the Pretty in Pink movie.
Right. That was from '86. Was that written specifically for the film?
It was indeed. Actually, the funny story is that we wrote a completely different song, having gone down to Paramount Pictures and met the cast and met John Hughes. We had 2 days off in LA before we were starting a tour with Thompson Twins, and we went into the studio, just wrote something totally off the top of our heads, finished at 5 in the morning, sent a cassette by bike over to Paramount, and John Hughes phoned our manager at 9 in the morning the next day, and our manager phoned us up and woke us up and said, "I'm afraid to say they like it, get back in the studio and finish it." So, but we'd originally written a completely different song, and they changed the ending of Pretty in Pink, and the song that we'd written lyrically didn't fit, so that's why we arrived in LA armed with a 2-inch tape, ready to mix the song we'd written, and they said, "Yeah, can you write us another one tomorrow?" So it's amazing how sometimes, you know, necessity is the mother of the invention of a big hit single.
Well, we're going to hear a live version of that song from the live Architecture and Morality CD that came out last year. This is If You Leave by OMD. We'll be back with more from Andy McCluskey. Some live music from OMD from 2008. Of course, it's a live album and also a DVD, the Architecture and Morality and More CD and DVD combo. And Andy McCluskey is on the phone with us, and I noticed you were laughing at the beginning of that song.
I think I seem to recall, actually, if you see the DVD, the company's alive, I think that somebody threw some underwear on stage at me. It somewhat distracted me for a split second, but it still happens. But the other talking about live, actually, is we are in negotiations, and it's always dangerous to say you're going to do something because you'll let people down if you don't. But at the moment, we are discussing with another British band about touring the States in the fall of this year, and I really hope it's going to come off, because I know through our website we've had a lot of people in North America saying, "Well, you've toured Europe, when are you coming over the pond?" So that is really high on our list of priorities.
Well, OMD continued, you know, with various members coming and going, and sort of wrapped up around '96. And then you went into producing and writing, and then what was the decision to reform the group and then tour behind the album Architecture and Morality?
I think by '96 you got to realize that I was then in a band that was considered to be a past-its-sell-by-date 80s synth band, and there was nothing that seemed to be more out of date than that at the height of Britpop, when you had Blur and Oasis all over the charts. And of course, you know, and guitars somehow had become fashionable again, and synthesizers, which we thought were the future, had amazingly gone out of fashion. It was very depressing. So it just seemed like I was banging my head against a brick wall, but I was conceited enough to believe I could write songs for other people, and so that's what I did, and I had some success writing songs for other people. But in the end, you know, it was frustrating not being able to do your own thing. And with the passage of time, I mean, I guess effectively, you know, as we got into the new millennium, pop rock music is an old art form, if you dare to call it an art form. It doesn't really have anywhere specifically new to go. It's kind of done. It's covered all the bases. And so we're in this sort of postmodern era where there's nothing new, therefore there's nothing out of fashion. And so if you've got a catalogue of good material and you're considered fairly cool and you can still do it, well, hey, you're allowed back on the stage again. So people kept asking us to tour, and we tentatively put some shows on sale in 2007, and the 12 shows sold out, and we ended up doing 40 that year. So we're now back in the mode of playing live again. We've also enjoying ourselves doing a few different things. We're doing art installations and playing with orchestras, and there will be a new album next year as well.
Excellent. Are you also touring behind Dazzle Ships? Is that a rumor? Or?
That was re-released last year because it was his 25th anniversary, and we sort of took that as an opportunity to see if it could get reassessed, and it did actually. It got considerably better reviews 25 years after it was released than it did when it got released in 1983.
Right.
That was, in Europe for us, that was a bit of a career stopper. Actually, we went from 3 million album sales to 300,000 album sales. It was I think we just went a little too experimental for most record buyers, but so we toured last year doing some of that album, but not the whole one.
But you've got, as you say, a new one coming sometime next year, and
yep.
And you're working on that now. I take it on and off. It's that sort of thing every couple of weeks, or
yeah. It's mostly complete actually. Paul and myself have sort of found the new way of writing where we send MP3s to each other and Pro Tools files, and sort of I'll have a fiddle and send it back to him, and then he'll mess around and send it back to me. So it's because he lives in London and I live near Liverpool, but it's really, hey, I would say this, but it sounds great. One of the dilemmas we have is that as we're called a heritage in inverted commas act these days, which is not a phrase I like, but that's the way we're perceived. And of course, one of the dilemmas you have is that people, they want to come and see you play live and play the songs they remember. But there's this, there's an element in people's mind. They say, well, there's a reason why this band split up. It's because they couldn't write any hit songs anymore. So please don't make a new album and burst our bubble. And even worse, please don't play too many new songs on stage because we're going to go to the bar. But I'm conceited enough still to think that actually we have got a fantastic album up our sleeve.
Well, that's good to hear. And if anyone wants to find out exactly what's going on with Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, they can go to the website is? It's
omd.uk.com.
And also on MySpace, too.
Indeed, yes.
Yes. What are one of your favorite tracks? What would you consider the definitive OMD track?
I suppose that I would probably have to go back to some of the songs that were bigger in Europe than before we got big in America. And I would probably say that songs like Electricity or Enola Gay or Souvenir or Joan of Arc, the big songs from the early 3 albums would probably be the most defining OMD songs.
What do you think of these remixes that have come out? Like Moby did some remixes. Did you sanction that at all?
We did, yeah. It's because we'd always been influenced by other people, and in fact we'd been sampling and using bits and pieces of other people's tracks. We'd always had this mentality that it's interesting to sort of cut and paste and try other ways of doing things. So we've generally allowed all sorts of remixes to be done, and for the most part, certainly the ones we've sanctioned them because we like them. We do get an awful lot of really bad, cheesy Euro techno versions of Enola Gay sort of thrown out. I seem to get about 6 requests a year for some god-awful techno version of that song. But
well, thanks, Andy. This has been great, and we certainly hope to see you in the U.S.
We will certainly be making every effort to come over there, and great to speak to you, and maybe we'll hopefully get to see you when we're close by playing live at the end of the year.
I will be at that show.